What new China strategy can North America, Europe, and their global allies employ to protect their interests and keep the People's Republic of China on an equal footing? Decoupling or de-risking? Stand up or keep silent? After talks with Henry Kissinger and leading China specialists as well visiting the People's Republic of China, Taiwan, Vietnam, South Korea, and Japan, Mission Future proposes a fresh master plan fair partnership with China. Which elements are key? 1. A self-confident dialogue policy with China at eye level. German-American geostrategist Dr. Fritz Kramer, my mentor for 25 years, who in 1944 discovered young Henry Kissinger in the US Army and became his first mentor, called the superficiality of foreign policy often a noble chatter. He warned about provocative weakness of the West. There is frequently a desire to pursue a policy described and designated as de-escalation and prudence, meeting rituals without substance, friendliness without problem solving, not outlining your thoughts and objectives but remaining comfortably silent. There is a lack of historical and analytical depth and background information and a clever containment plan for China policy. Kissinger formulated this disconnect diplomatically. Today's meetings produce one communiqué after another, but not much happens afterwards. In fact, too often there is a lack of concrete proposals, both for dialogue and for containment. Kissinger recounted how he had begun and maintained the dialogue with China in the early 1970s. The Nixon administration spent two-thirds of the time explaining the American position in global affairs and listening to Chinese views. That is important today. Dialogue is the mother tongue of humanity and diplomacy. It helps us to forge enemies into opponents and opponents into friends. Therefore, we should agree with Henry Kissinger when he recommends, what is needed is a permanent high-level dialogue, analyzing events soberly and adopting a mode of managing disagreements. Don't wait for controversial things to bubble up, eventually generating a confrontation. We need a fresh and self-confident open dialogue with China. More dialogue to explain our differing points of view, to listen and understand on both sides, instead of pompous state visits and glitzy PR diplomacy with nice pictures and mostly empty communiques. We need long-term, intensive discussions, concrete working papers from joint committees, initial proposals, and solution-oriented plain language without taboos. 2. A new China double strategy of détente plus deterrence is needed. Like NATO's Harmel report from 1967, let US apply the most successful strategy tool of the Cold War to China. NATO's Harmel report of 1967, which introduced as a dual strategy of credible deterrence and simultaneous dialogue. Called détente in the 1970s, combined with disarmament treaties with the main adversary, the USSR. This was the West's winning formula for the Cold War. Not a strategy of neutrality or appeasement with inadequate defense capabilities, but strength, plus dialogue. This dual strategy effectively deterred the hawks in the Kremlin for decades and kept peace in the nuclear age. The US and Europe need a new Harmel strategy for dealing with China. A China dual strategy based on dialogue and deterrence. 3. China is making a major strategic mistake. Just like the Japanese Empire or German Kaiser Wilhelm II. China or the Chinese are not the problem. The harsh dictatorship of the Chinese Communist Party and its ideology pose dangerous threats to the free world. The Chinese State Party fans the flames of nationalism and is depriving people of the oxygen of freedom. It produces lies. All statistics are manipulated. True is what Dai Communist Party wants to be true. That is fact. Its policy resembles an angry, fire-breathing red dragon intimidating, destroying, and demanding tribute. This bad habit is remembers of the time of the warring empires in China from 453 to 221 BC, or Kublai Khan of the Mongolian Yuan dynasty from 1271 to 1294. They also bear similarities to the Japanese Empire and the nationalistic arrogance and ignorance of Kaiser Wilhelm II in the German Reich in the 20th century. The leadership, relying on its successes and ideological exaggeration without compensatory criticism, becomes too arrogant and aggressive. This is very much un-Chinese, not what Lao Tzu demanded. Kindness in words creates trust. The peoples must live in peace. Only the humble are able to rule. Not like China's philosopher Confucius, who preached, "The superior man strives for harmony." Treat everyone as you would like to be treated yourself. Since 2012, the communist leaders with Xi are not smiling but roaring, not bamboo but rockets, not wisdom but dictates of power. Promoting the old German ideology of Marxism-Leninism, which had failed in 49 states over the last 100 years. This aggressive dragon policy should be replaced by a new harmonious panda policy as soon as possible. Otherwise, China will be facing a catastrophe of nationalistic overestimation of its own capabilities and gradual isolation on the global level. Just like the nationalistic, expansionist, and arrogant Japanese empire in the 1930s. For over 30 years, China's diplomats have been particularly polite and welcome. Now they appear arrogant and aggressive. They are operating on thin ice in the danger zone of lost victories. Our great concern is that China's new leadership has not learned much from the history of the rise and fall of other great powers. Dainippon, the overly aggressive Japanese empire, also felt attacked and constricted in the 1930s, completely overestimated itself, and ultimately destroyed itself in 1945. The vitality of America was also underestimated. China today is like the Wilhelmina German Empire. Without exuberant nationalism, the new German Reich could have continued to grow as a successful and dynamic scientific and industrial nation and become Europe's dominant power. But Kaiser Wilhelm II wanted more. He challenged the British World Empire with his new fleet and its neighbor France, thus starting the First World War and his own downfall. The Xi nationalists also overestimate themselves and are also playing with fire. They became too ignorant and arrogant, leaving the Chinese wisdom of Confucius and Lao Tzu behind. Some even have invasion plans for Taiwan until 2049, which could quickly lead to a new world fire. Is that a wise policy in China's interest? Beijing is making another mistake. Without the oxygen of freedom, there can be no sufficient creativity in the country and no real enthusiasm of the youth. But that is China's future and the prerequisite for progress, the party's performance for its citizens, harmony, and thus internal stability. Those who love China must therefore strengthen the panda forces of harmony in the country and contain the totalitarian Red Dragon elements. The vast majority of the Chinese population long for truth, freedom, justice, and peace, just as we do. What is crucial is a balance between a strong state creating progress and prosperity and the existence of individual freedoms. The current Xi model is an ancient one rooted in the thinking of the imperial period and old and failed German ideology of Marxism. Without more freedom and humanity, there can be neither a harmonious land of smiles inside China nor a peaceful world order in the 21st century outside. China needs a fresh mission, future China, with more freedom and harmony in the next stage of development. Let us therefore support the country's courageous forces for the future. 4. Do not blame Beijing. China is only strong because the free world is weak. Like water, China fills the vacuums created by weakness of the West. The objective is to make the West fit for and capable of shaping the future. Otherwise, China is bound to win and dominate. Do not blame Beijing for using the soft spots of the West. Blame the West for being too weak, soft, and vulnerable. A mission future is needed in the US and Europe, as well as Japan or South Korea and India. This is the core of balancing the Chinese dragon. 5. Contain the totalitarian challenges of Beijing and friends. We live in a global village. Therefore, we have to fight for our rules and values if the house rules threaten to be rewritten by a totalitarian playbook. Freedom and human rights are facing icy headwinds from many directions. Challenges of the liberal order are growing globally, generating dangers from within and beyond national boundaries. Now China is collecting those forces to form an alternative bloc against the Western model of the United States and Europe. Beijing is not hesitating to include brutal totalitarian rulers like Iran, Russia, or North Korea. Dictatorships dominate the UN as well. Only a tiny minority of 30 full democracies are left there, including the US, Canada, UK, European countries, Japan, South Korea, or Australia, with 193 members of the United Nations. The dictators rule the United Nations in the General Assembly. There is a long-term threat to Western values of freedom. Our way of life is under attack. We have to act, or we will be forced to surrender, with all negative consequence for our fragile democracies, stability, wealth, and freedom. 6. Stop appeasement for better manager bonuses. Many top managers of Western companies prefer a policy not interfering with their business in China. They regularly warn of a confrontation, an economic war, and dragging the Europeans into the conflict between the USA and China. The top managers earn millions in bonuses based on short-term yearly profits, including China businesses. That is their personal focus and interest and nothing else. Not freedom of the Chinese people or Taiwan, but sales. This dominating attitude misunderstands the nature of China and the motives of the Communist Party. Western companies are welcome in China only as long as the ruling elite supports their presence. The firms can be marginalized and virtually be expropriated by new legislation. There is no protection against arbitrary decisions. Many foreign investors have experienced this in recent years. In addition, there is massive industrial espionage and dumping. Western companies are all living on a yellow volcano. There is another important argument. Appeasement never leads to peace, but to war. Any manager who wants to avoid war with China and the resulting economic upheaval and sanctions, as against and by Russia in 2022, out of self-interest, must support a credible peace and deterrence strategy. 7. Credible military containment is needed. Only the USA can contain China now, allied with Japan, South Korea, Australia, India, and European nations such as the UK. Still, many people warn of what they call confrontation, push for dialogue, and criticize an aggressive tone against Beijing. They are essentially promoting appeasement. It makes the CP of China hungrier and more aggressive. Therefore, it makes confrontation and war more likely. Without credible deterrence by the United States and its allies Japan and South Korea or the UK, the Red Dragons will dominate. Peace through strength. 8. Think like President Xi. Taiwan is the new Pearl Harbor. Like Japan on December 7, 1941, Xi could think Taiwan is essential for his image and an easy win, using a boycott or attack, leading to a new ice age in the relations with the West, which, he could calculate, is too weak and split to react forcefully. Few people in the inner circle dare to tell him the truth. Attacking Taiwan is not in Beijing's interest. It would be the beginning of the end. This must be told Xi again and again. Downplaying Western reactions now by promoting de-escalation as well as distancing oneself from US appeals motivate aggressive behavior by the Red Dragon. Such an approach would promote war, not peace. Just like the proponents of appeasement Chamberlain and Daladier in the 1930s stimulated Hitler's desire to invade the Rhineland in 1936 and Czechoslovakia in 1938, the beginning of the end and World War II. To avoid misperception by Xi, an underlying credible deterrence strategy ought to determine the policy of the US, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and the European Union and the UK. Ukraine's weakness lacking credible defenses inspired Russian President Putin's decision to invade in February 2022. We should have learned this lesson by now. It is crystal clear that Xi is playing the Taiwan power game according to the teachings of Sun Tzu. Xi will not attack if he thinks he could possibly lose. It is less important what people in the West think, but instead, how Xi and his people think. Perception and mentality matter most. Xi has not decided to attack Taiwan or strangulate it with a boycott. He is testing how far he can go. How will Taiwan react? What will the US and other nations do? If his perception tells him he will lose a war, he will not start it. If he thinks he will win, he will attack. Therefore, credible deterrence matters most. Xi is following a perfect Sun Tzu strategy. We know it, but many do not get it. The appeasers set the wrong signals of provocative weakness, which promotes exactly the war they want to avoid being nice to Mr. Xi. Xi will not attack Taiwan for 2 reasons. First, he can't calculate how the US military would react. Second, China will not have the military capabilities for an attack before 2030. 9. Master plan, fair partnership with China, needed. What kind of a new China strategy can North America, Europe, and their global allies employ to protect their interests and keep the People's Republic of China on an equal footing? Our proposal for a containment master plan, fair partnership with China, contains these 13 elements. Number 1. A unified containment policy of all democracies is needed. Both the European Union, 450 million, and the US, 330 million, are too small alone to effectively contain the People's Republic of China. China wants to separate Europe from the US and the Asian states from America. They should remain neutral in the conflict with the USA. Xi's goal is to split up the unity of the West, primarily the separation of Europe and the USA. This is also Putin's main goal. The West must draw up its own joint master plan, including the US, Europe, Japan, South Korea, Australia, India separate. Number 2. Engage the Global South more intelligently. We must re-establish better contacts with the countries of the Global South and prevent them from slipping into the China-Russia camp. Number 3. De-risking, no decoupling. Decoupling means putting all relations on ice. De-risking is better, i.e., risk reduction and mitigation, because China is still needed as an economic partner. Number 4. Don't stay silent, stand up. No subservience, but instead more self-confidence. China currently considers itself the winner in systems competition. Number 5. Transparency and honesty. They are indispensable, being candid about what you want and what is prohibited. No subservience, but instead more self-confidence. Number 6. Support the Chinese forces of humanity and freedom, because they are the good future of the country and contain aggressors. This includes immediate entry bans on Chinese officials in all Western countries who are responsible for serious human rights violations and industrial espionage. Invitations to the Dalai Lama and other freedom fighters instead of appeasement and silence. More visits to Taiwan and support for defense. Number 7. Chinese acquisitions under stricter government reservation. Government approval should be lowered to 5% for participations by Chinese companies. Number 8. Establish reciprocity. Everything that China is allowed to do in the West can do in China. Everything that is forbidden to the West in China is also forbidden to the Chinese in the West. Fair trade and equal rights in market access, patent protection, and investment. Number 9. Building large international IT and AI consortia from the US, EU, UK, Japan, South Korea, India, Singapore for 6G and AI in the fourth industrial revolution. No access of Huawei in sensitive areas and choosing Nokia, Ericsson, and Cisco as independent alternatives to 5G. Number 10. Developing strategically important production capacities in Europe and the US, for example, for masks or raw materials for medicines. In addition, more production in India and Southeast Asia. Number 11. Radically reducing industrial dependence on China. Increase focus on India and Southeast Asia. In July 2020, Japan paid over $653 million to 87 companies that decided to withdraw their production sites from China. Number 12. Punish abuse consistently with a zero-tolerance policy and avoid provocative weakness. Stricter supervision of compliance with all treaties and immediate sanctions for abusive behavior. Number 13. Transparency. Disclose the activities of the China lobby, cyber attacks, and industrial espionage, no longer politely concealing them. All factors together are bound to determine the system competition between democracies and totalitarian China. Join our missionfuture.com AI Action Network China for many details and to learn more about a successful China Realpolitik with heart and mind.